Today, we're going deep inside the International Criminal Court. We're going to look at a really critical moment in the case against the former Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte. Day 2 of his confirmation hearing, well, it wasn't about high-minded legal arguments. No, this was a methodical, almost forensic breakdown of the evidence, all designed to connect the words of a president to thousands of deaths on the streets.
You know, for the prosecutors at the ICC, the whole thing starts with words, specifically public statements just like this one. Their argument is pretty simple. When a head of state repeatedly tells the police and the public to kill, the result is, predictably, lethal violence. To them, this isn't just some political statement, it's the very foundation of their entire case.
And that really brings us to the central question sitting right in front of the court. The defense, they just dismiss it as bombastic rhetoric, political noise. But the prosecution, they argue these words were something way more sinister, a direct command that actually unleashed a state policy of murder.
So as we dive into day 2, the whole tone of the hearing gets heavier, much more forensic. The prosecution's task here is absolutely immense. They have to prove a direct link between the president's policy and the violence happening on the ground, and they have to do it piece by painstaking piece.
And here is the key legal hurdle they have to clear. For these killings to even be considered a crime against humanity, they can't just be random rogue incidents. Nope. Prosecutors have to prove they were part of a widespread and systematic attack. Basically, a coordinated campaign directed right at the civilian population.
The prosecution's argument kicks off by taking Duterte's public speeches and treating them not as political noise, but as direct evidence of a common plan.
So the prosecution breaks down his rhetoric into 3 distinct jobs. First, you have authorization. His words were a signal that lethal force wasn't just permitted, it was expected. Second, incitement. He was actively encouraging both police and vigilantes to kill. And third, and this is huge, impunity. He promised the people doing the killing that they'd be shielded from prosecution. That's essentially giving them a license to kill.
Okay, so after laying that out, the prosecution moved on to show how this alleged plan was actually put into action. They presented a case that this wasn't just chaos, but a highly organized campaign with a very clear structure.
And the scale of this, it is just staggering. While the official government numbers are lower, human rights organizations estimate the death toll could be as high as 30,000 people. A number like that helps establish the widespread nature of the attack they're trying to prove.
Now, this data you're seeing here is absolutely central to the prosecution's theory of a Davao model. What they argue is that the blueprint for this violence was created when Duterte was the mayor of Davao City, and then it was just scaled up to a national level when he became president. These numbers right here show that terrifying expansion in action.
But how were the targets identified? Well, the prosecution points right to this, the PRRD list, which they flat out call a kill list. They argue that this whole hierarchical system, from high-value targets at the top all the way down to local neighborhood lists, is direct evidence of a systematic, centrally directed plan.
All right, let's move on to what was maybe the most powerful part of the day's hearing, the deconstruction of the official police narrative. And it all hinged on a single repeated phrase.
That word is nanlaban. It means he fought back. This term showed up in thousands, and I mean thousands, of police reports justifying killings as acts of self-defense. The prosecution, though, argued it wasn't a description of what really happened, but a copy-paste script for a cover-up.
And the case of 17-year-old Kian de los Santos is probably the starkest example of this. The police report claimed he fought back, that he nanlaban. But then the CCTV footage came out, and it showed him being dragged into an alley and executed. The prosecution argues that Kian's case wasn't some exception. It was just a rare time the script was caught on camera.
And the forensic evidence, again and again, just dismantles that nanlaban script. Experts found execution-style wounds, the total lack of evidence that victims had even fired a weapon, and a truly heartbreaking pattern. The victims were overwhelmingly from the absolute poorest communities.
This is what led lawyers for the victims to frame the entire campaign with this incredibly powerful phrase. They argued it was less a war on drugs and more a war targeting a very specific, very vulnerable part of the population.
Now, every court case has 2 sides, so let's turn to the defense's counterargument and also look at who exactly the prosecution is trying to hold responsible here.
You see, the prosecution's case doesn't stop with Duterte. They're arguing a theory of co-perpetration, which basically means they believe he didn't act alone. They've named key officials,
Everyone from the police chief running the operations to the justice secretary who allegedly guaranteed no one would be punished, as essential parts of this whole plan.
So, the defense. They maintain that Duterte is innocent. Their key arguments are pretty straightforward. His words were just bombastic rhetoric taken out of context. The ICC has no jurisdiction since the Philippines withdrew from the court. And finally, that the country's own justice system is perfectly capable of handling these cases.
So, what happens next? Well, the judges aren't deciding guilt or innocence, not yet. The whole purpose of this hearing is to determine if there are substantial grounds to believe that the alleged crimes were actually committed. If they say yes, then the case proceeds to a full trial.
And all of that leaves us with this final and most crucial question. When you look beyond all the legal arguments and the forensic data, this case really forces us to think about the human stakes and what justice truly looks like for the families of the thousands and thousands who lost their lives.